Welcome to Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape podcast. Hosted by Dr. Holly Krutka, Executive Director of the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. The show highlights SER's role supporting our mission to promote energy-driven economic development for the state of Wyoming.
Welcome back, listeners. Today we're touching on a very important topic here in Wyoming, and that's nuclear energy. So if you know about nuclear energy in the state of Wyoming, the first thing you would know is that we haven't had any commercial nuclear reactors in the state, but the state of Wyoming has long been one of the nation's top uranium producers. We have incredible uranium geologists. We have some new technology that is being developed and deployed around environmental remediation. But with a resurgence of nuclear energy, Wyoming is really in the spotlight and has an opportunity to leverage much more than just the fuel. And so today my guest is Joe Miller of BWXT, a global leader in nuclear energy technology and manufacturing. And so we're going to talk to Joe about his career, his journey on his career, his leadership approach, and also what might make Wyoming attractive for investment in nuclear energy and what BWXT is doing to work with the state of Wyoming. So Joe, thank you so much for being on our podcast. Can you start by sharing a bit about your background and how you came to be in the nuclear energy space?
Absolutely. And thank you for having me, Holly. Really excited to talk to you and talk to all of your listeners. So when I was 18, I really had no idea what I wanted to do. And so I had a false start in college, went for a few months, and then decided that because I wasn't exactly sure what my career journey would be, I would join the Navy and open up some opportunities for myself, allow myself to have some money for college when I got out of the Navy. And
Smart.
Exactly. And determine what I wanted to do. So in the Navy, I got into the nuclear pipeline. So they have tests, the entrance exams, in helping you determine what good rating, what good job you could get in the Navy. And all signs pointed to me being a nuclear operator.
Wow.
Yeah, so I didn't know much about nuclear at that time. I took STEM classes. I took advanced math classes while I was in high school. But the first 2 years while you're in the Navy enlisted, you go through the nuclear pipeline, which means 2 years of schooling. You learn a lot about what it takes to operate nuclear power plants, the physics behind the nuclear power plants, how they're constructed, what the cause and effect relationship of maintaining a steam plant that's powered by a nuclear reactor. And I really enjoyed that. And then in the second half of that education platform, I learned a lot about radiochemistry and how to maintain the reactor plant, how to maintain the steam generators, and ensure that the operation of the unit plus the water chemistry was amenable to the tactical operation of nuclear submarines. So after the first 2 years, I was on board the USS Norfolk in Norfolk, Virginia, and we did a lot of deployments in the Mediterranean, and I got to experience the sheer power of nuclear and how that nuclear energy is translated into propulsion, into power generation, and how we can, as a country, use that technology to maintain peace worldwide. So I fell in love with nuclear at an early age. And while I was in the Navy, I decided, I have money for college when I exit the Navy, but there are also opportunities while you're in. So I was able to get my bachelor's degree in nuclear while I was in the Navy, and then use all of my college fund and GI Bill to get my master's degree from Oregon State University, also in nuclear.
Great.
So it was a great way to start my career. I went from not knowing what I wanted to do to falling in love with nuclear, and then ultimately translating that into an education that I could use upon exiting the Navy in very early 2004.
So you're now at BWXT. So let's start with, for anyone who's not familiar, what is BWXT's core business and expertise?
Yeah, there are two major segments within BWXT. Commercial operations, which is headquartered in Ontario, Canada. So commercial operations, they focus on manufacturing components for the existing light water reactor fleet worldwide. So that includes, and heavy water fleet worldwide. So CANDU reactors are a Canadian design. They're in Canada, they're in South America, they're in Europe. So we manufacture the components, we manufacture the fuel, we do refurbishment of those entire plants. And also, we're on the cutting edge of technology in steam generators and heavy equipment for new nuclear technology. So we work with existing customers, we work with utilities, and we work with all this emergence in advanced nuclear. So it's a way to translate the expertise and the over 100 years of manufacturing experience that exists in Canada to every commercial offering that is happening right now and into the future. So there's a subsegment of that business in commercial ops that focuses on the medical industry, so providing medical radioisotopes to pharmaceutical companies so they can inject those into patients and allow those drugs to evaluate the internal organs. So it's a diagnostic drug that gets injected into patients. And then also there are therapeutic drugs that we manufacture for pharmaceutical companies. So it's a translation of our expertise in manufacturing, our translation and expertise in nuclear material handling, and then how we can use that for an industry outside of nuclear power generation. I talked about commercial operations headquartered out of Canada, and then we have our government operations, and that's headquartered out of Lynchburg, Virginia.
Okay.
And that's the part of the business that I run. And I've been running that business for about 2 months, but I've been part of this business for about 14 years. And in government operations, we have 3 subsegments. One is called Nuclear Operations Group. The primary customer is the Naval Reactors Program. So we manufacture steam generators, we manufacture reactor components, nuclear fuel for that customer. We also have Advanced Technologies. That was my previous job, running the Advanced Technologies business. That business focuses on everything that's emerging, new novel systems for the Department of Defense and for commercial customers. That the biggest project within Advanced Technologies is Project Pele. That's building out, demonstrating, being the prime integrator for a new nuclear system that will be operated at the Idaho National Lab here in the next couple of years. And then we have a space portfolio in that business. We perform a lot of research and development for the entire footprint of BWXT. And then the third subsegment is Technical Services Group. So that group focuses on management and operations of large national laboratories, also site remediation through the Department of Energy, and then also operations of DOE and NSA sites. So it's a broad spectrum of scope, but there's some expertise there that we translate from our core business into the management, operation, cleanup of the Department of Energy sites throughout the United States. And very recently, we won an award to do the same type of scope in Canada. And so we use our Canadian footprint, we use our U.S. footprint, and all of the knowledge and expertise in that business to maintain safe operations and really meet the mission goals for each one of those customers in the U.S. and in Canada.
Great. So through all that, I mean, obviously a very large, robust company, BWXT has played a role in national security and energy innovation, kind of all around the nuclear sector, but there's so many applications. So how do you see that mission evolving in today's energy landscape?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it is evolving pretty rapidly because the nuclear energy landscape is evolving with that. And so we meet that demand signal by applying resources to where we see these mature companies going. And we have contracts on the commercial side with GE Hitachi, so they're building plants. So we will be building plants for OPG in Canada. And so there's a lot of innovation that has to go into that. We have to translate the design drawings into manufacturing drawings. We have to work with vendors to make sure the materials show up on time and be able to produce those components on the timelines that those projects require. And same goes for new technologies. The commercial ops segment is working with a variety of these new reactor vendors. They have some novel reactor designs. And so as they go through the maturation of their design process, interacting with our staff in BWXT, we can give them feedback. How would you build this design? How could you optimize the design for manufacturing? And how can you get each one of the components out of our shop on the throughput that you're looking for to meet all of your program timelines and your customers' timelines and demand signals? So there's a good interplay right now of producing components for existing fleets and also preparing for what the future of nuclear is. And that requires a tremendous amount of innovation. And the same goes on the nuclear operations side. You know, what we're focusing on in advanced nuclear within Advanced Technologies are creating this very compact nuclear reactor so you can site those reactors anywhere in the world. You can operate for several years without refueling, and you can create energy distribution that could be of use both for defense and commercial uses. And we see that in Wyoming and Green River in our commercial variant of that same technology.
Yeah. So, well, I think you covered this well, but is there anything else you want to add that sets BWXT apart from other companies in the nuclear sector?
The translation of our nuclear expertise into a strategic vision is what sets us apart, right? We have that very strong base fundamental knowledge on what it takes to design, manufacture, and deliver nuclear components. We use the innovation piece of our business to complement that skill set and create a very strong strategic vision. And implementing that vision is something that we focus on throughout the entire business all day, every day. And it's proving well for us. And we're growing fast in every segment that we have because we do a really good job of integrating the capabilities throughout all of BWXT to meet that strategic vision.
And I love what you said about all this historic expertise you have. It translates into all these new reactor designs. And maybe, I love how you asked that question, like, how are you actually going to build that, right? Like, you have the science, but sometime you're going to have to manufacture the parts. And that's such a strength of BWXT, and the fact that you're willing to, continue to invest in the new technologies and work with developers.
Exactly. And we're able to adopt a lot of lessons learned from other industrial manufacturers, from automotive to pharmaceutical. And those lessons learned in technologies that have been developed and integrated into that manufacturing process is something that we stay very attuned to, because as we adopt that into what we see the future of nuclear, more production, higher throughput from each one of our factories, we are ready to scale up when these programs are taken off.
That's great. So let's talk about your journey at BWXT. We talked about your early career in the Navy. So you joined BWXT in 2011 as a test engineer coming from the U.S. Navy, and you've progressed throughout the company to your current role, which is President of Government Operations. So can you walk through that journey and any key experiences or leadership lessons that helped shape your career or your steps along the way?
Yeah, absolutely. When I exited the Navy in 2004, I immediately went into nuclear submarine shipbuilding.
Oh.
And so that was a great way to understand the front end of that process. Operations is something that I became very attuned to. I went through my academic process to get my bachelor's degree, but understanding how submarines were built and operated or commissioned and then ultimately operated, that was a great way to add to my knowledge base. And then I took a segue from nuclear altogether for 6 years and started working in the semiconductor manufacturing industry. So I worked for Samsung. I worked in a process called photolithography, and understanding the chemical process and the mechanical process and high throughput manufacturing and all of the data that can be gathered in a high throughput manufacturing facility gave me another set of capabilities that helped me prepare for what I did and what I have been doing in BWXT. So fast forward to 2011, I started as a test engineer. So I wrote a test program to prove the thermal hydraulic behavior of a small modular reactor. So we were in development of that reactor system. We built a very large scale test facility, and I ran the operational sequence and gathered all of the data in those sequences to prove that the thermal hydraulic behavior of that plant, the response during faulted scenarios or accident scenarios, is exactly how we designed it. So we could prove the passive safety of the plant. We could prove the operation to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to help aid our licensing process. So that gave me another really good viewpoint, not just from the manufacturing of submarines and the operation of nuclear reactors, but also how do you test and commission and how do you prove that these technologies actually work. From there, we started this business. So there were a half dozen of us in BWXT that started Advanced Technologies because we started to see this demand signal beginning with the U.S. government, but we knew there were going to be commercial interest in new novel technologies. We saw this demand for power. We knew that we had a lot of credibility as BWXT in producing components, but the missing piece was how do we get innovation into the business, and how do we translate innovation into development? How do we translate that development into prototypes? And then the last step that we're working on now is how do we translate those prototypes into production units? So that was a 6-year journey, and it was really interesting for me because you start to amass this team of very innovative people. You start to integrate that innovative group with the other innovators throughout BWXT, and then you start to really see and you visualize and design and manufacture a new system, not just the reactor, but all the balance of plant, the power conversion, the control systems. And so that gave us a really good line of sight on how to interact with a new customer base, because it's not, we were no longer just a manufacturer interacting with customers that wanted reactors. We had also been going through this development process ourselves. So it gave us a level of maturity. It helps each one of our customers have faith that we can translate their early designs back into manufacturing. So that's been the journey. And then, as I go through my career, setting 5, 10, 15-year strategies and the interactions that I've had at the corporate level and throughout all of BWXT, I was honored to be able to take over the government operations group, which includes advanced technologies and the other 3 segments that I discussed. So it's been quite a journey. It started off with me not knowing what I wanted to do in the late 90s, all the way to running a business that I have a lot of respect for and just really proud to lead.
Yeah. And I hate to break it to you, but I don't think you're alone not knowing what you want to do. That's most of us. Some of us take a different journey where we just switch majors a bunch of times and then continue to figure it out.
I figured it would be the easiest to figure it out when I could focus underwater on a submarine.
It seems to work out pretty well so far. So, Joe, this podcast is a little interesting. We're focused on energy innovation and energy in Wyoming, but we also like to talk about leadership. It touches successful, all parts of our lives that are going to be successful. And so we like to ask our guests about their leadership or any experiences that they've had that they'd like to share around leadership. So we have a few questions around that. So the first one is, what leadership questions have shaped your approach as you've moved into senior roles at BWXT?
It started on the submarine. You're underwater with 120 other people, and you have to develop a collaborative way to work with a team. And your life depends on it. The mission depends on it. And it's a quick way. It's a good way to quickly mature your leadership style. So you learn the whole spectrum of personalities, and there's no avoiding it. And if you can grasp that, if you can get followership, if you know how to make decisions in a timely manner, that's where it all stems from for me. And then as I go through my career running test programs and commissioning programs on back shift, I worked second shift for a while. I worked a rotating shift while I was in the Navy. I worked essentially third shift when I was at Samsung. So when you're there and there's not a lot of other management interface, you have to make decisions. You have to make very high consequence decisions, whether it be in nuclear operations or high value consequence decisions in semiconductor manufacturing. There's a lot that goes into that, and that process is dependent on quality and speed. And so decisions have to be made no matter what time of day it is. So I think all of those things built up my leadership style. And then when I joined BWXT, it opened my eyes under the leadership that we've had since I've been with the company on how I can shape different organizations and how I can inject technology and how I can understand and then ultimately set strategic vision. So it's been a building process over the last 25 years or so, but it really started with just learning how to interact with people and be on a team and then eventually lead teams.
So did you have formal leadership training when you were in the Navy? You did? Okay.
I did, yeah. So they do a good job.
They do.
And so I went to a variety of different leadership trainings there. And then also with BWXT, I've been in leadership training. So 3 different variants of that in different levels as I've grown in my career. So there is a focus there, and that focus helps build those teams much like you do in the Navy. Yeah. You put this cohort together and you have a couple of dozen people throughout a multi-thousand person organization, and you start to build that network and you start to build leadership traits. And I think that has yielded really well, because a lot of those leaders that I was in training with are emerging throughout the organization, and we depend on each other to be successful. And it's really set the stage for my future and the future of a lot of my colleagues.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're going to read a leadership book, one from the military somewhere is always a good one. And I think the last one I did was Wisdom of the Bullfrog, which it's an individual whose name I cannot remember, but he ended up leading the University of Texas after being in the military. And it takes a lot of really great leadership skills to switch industries like that from the military to academia. So I thought that was particularly valuable. But you've led teams through growth opportunities and industry challenges. So what advice would you share with Wyoming leaders as we all think about diversifying the state's energy economy and really making sure that we're taking advantage of some of the opportunities that are in front of us now?
core strengths. Understand your core strengths and understand what you want the outcomes to be, and make those outcomes pretty long term, because that allows you to make decisions day in and day out based on the long-term outcome that you're shooting for. It also removes some of the unnecessary detail on the long-range vision, and it allows you to apply a lot of detail on the short-term vision. And we see that in Wyoming, right? Wyoming understands what they want to be great at, and that's energy production. Yeah. It's mining. It's an extreme focus as compared to other entities, other states that we've interacted with. So understanding your core strengths, utilizing that for the near-term benefit, and then setting the stage for a very long-term vision, and it'll help you make good decisions.
That's really well said. And I want to talk more about BWXT and Wyoming and the opportunities, but let's do one more leadership question. So on your approach, and we've talked a lot about the innovation process and how you've led, but you're in pretty much probably the most highly regulated industry ever in the world of all time, of all humanity. And so how do you kind of balance that, staying innovative, but also prioritizing safety and accountability, and in this really highly regulated industry, how can you still make it really innovative?
So the approach that we've taken there, and you're right, the regulation that exists in nuclear is immense, and it's important, and it's well executed within our company. So understanding the basis for that and the fundamentals and putting all of the safety processes in place is what has to happen. Now, when you want to get innovative with nuclear products, the way that we've learned is do that in a non-nuclear environment. So we have an innovation campus that we cut the ribbon on, but we've had footprints in facilities that we innovate in without any nuclear material. And so it's good to go through that quick and dirty procurement process and learn and fail fast and learn from those failures. And we do that in an environment that doesn't require regulation because we're not handling nuclear materials. Once we feel like that has matured to a point where we're ready to utilize that process, whether it be manufacturing or data science or a variety of other things that we're doing in design and translating that design to manufacturing, we will start to move and qualify that equipment for nuclear operations. We'll move it into a regulated area. And the big benefit there, not only can you move very fast in that initial environment, but you can also adopt a lot of knowledge base in the nuclear operations by having people come to those facilities, understand how the machines work, understand what's going to happen in the safety review process to allow those machines to operate safely in that nuclear environment, utilizing nuclear material, enriched uranium, essentially. Yeah. So that's something that we've established, and we've scaled that up. So we started with 5,000 square feet, and now we're nearly 200,000 square feet of space where it is maker space for nuclear that we can, drive technology adoption very rapidly and then ultimately bring that into how we manufacture nuclear products.
So would another way of saying that be, for energy, nuclear it contributes heat, right?
That's
and
right.
You can use other things to make heat. Obviously, there's a lot of advantages to nuclear, but to test prototypes or equipment, you can make the heat a different way and test it out. Is that pretty much what you're saying?
Exactly, because a nuclear reactor is just a heat exchanger that creates its own heat. Yeah. It doesn't need combustion. Right. It doesn't need other inputs. And you can simulate that a lot. You can simulate that a variety of different ways. And the way that test programs usually go, since I spent a decade and a half just testing and commissioning new systems, you start off at the component level, you get into a subscale demonstration, you get into a scaled system demonstration, and then you ultimately get to integrated testing. So you can use a variety of different ways to heat those components. And we have very flexible test rig inside of our innovation campus that you can put any kind of geometry inside of that test rig, and you can go through the flow field studies, you can compare it to computational fluid dynamic models, and it helps us, like you said, it helps us use a non-nuclear heat source to understand to a very fine level of detail what each one of our geometries and what each one of our nuclear reactors are going to require.
Cool. Okay, so let's talk about BWXT in Wyoming and kind of the opportunities that are out there. So BWXT is considering Wyoming as a site for nuclear manufacturing or for a facility for nuclear manufacturing. So let's start at the beginning. What makes you look at Wyoming initially? What was the first step?
Well, there was a desire from Wyoming to take hold of energy security. So the foresight that existed in Wyoming knew that maintaining energy and the supply of energy in the state was crucial, especially for the mining industry. So the Energy Authority and some innovative entrepreneurs in Wyoming came to us and they said, hey, what is this offering for Pele? Could you translate that something into the Trona Patch in particular, and how would that look? And it was fortuitous for us because we had already signed an agreement with the Department of Energy to scale up the Project Pele reactor to a commercial variant. We've been working on that for a year or two, and so we were able to walk the staff from the Energy Authority through exactly what that would look like, how we would get through the development program, where the fuel would come from, how we would deploy these. And it became a very detailed conversation quickly because of the focus that existed there. And so what we ultimately thought through was, it's not just about the technology and developing the reactor and all the systems that go along with the reactor to translate that thermal energy to electrical energy, but it's also about the site. What does the site require? What is the current infrastructure? What is your plan to scale up from what you're currently taking off the grid or producing yourself through natural gas or whatever you decide to use and whatever you're currently using, and how do you translate that into a ramp on of nuclear technology so it can be a program plan, not a technology development or not even a technology insertion plan. It becomes more fulsome than that. So we started focusing in parallel a lot of our staff on how would you use this banner, BWXT Advanced Nuclear Reactor, in the Trona Patch. So that integration with the producers and the miners in that patch became a very good technical back and forth, something that we could depend on in building out all the program content. So it started off with just an honest question: could reactors be used? And the answer was, we think so, but there's work to be done, and we can't do that work by ourselves. We need to understand how that would be deployed inside of the state. And then that quickly translated to what supply chain exists in the state, because that's important. If there's going to be an investment by Wyoming, there needs to be a big benefit in Wyoming. And a lot of the entrepreneurs, and we talked about this before the podcast, everybody in Wyoming wears multiple hats.
Yeah.
And that gives you access almost instantly to the credible resources that exist in the state. So, L&H Industrial is a very good example. We started working with them very early in Gillette because they have extreme capability in precision manufacturing. And then that extended to other manufacturers in the state, companies that understand how to drill and create novel geometries for graphite, which is an important material. And then we started talking to the uranium miners and, how does that look? And how does the fuel cycle integrate with the reactor operations and fuel manufacturing of the reactor? So it became this evolving conversation where there were a lot of participants pretty early, and those participants have maintained interest in helping us evolve our thought process and vice versa on how we would use nuclear in the state.
Great. And there's a lot of excitement. And you've already mentioned it a couple times that you're working with the Wyoming Energy Authority. And I know Director Rob Krieger and Sean Schwab, we owe them a ton of thanks for a lot of things, but in this particular topic, for working with you and continuing to engage and help you find resources around the state. And they also, one of their resources is the Energy Matching Funds program that they administer. And can you talk about how that interaction and how those energy matching funds really has impacted your evaluation of Wyoming?
Yeah, it's a very go prove it to me type of fund. So we'll give you a little bit of money, prove to me that I'm getting value out of it, and then we can continue to match the contribution that you're making in Wyoming. So it was good for us too, because once again, it was a question: can this technology be used? And the answer is, we think so. And that's why those matching funds were instrumental in us developing these relationships, because we can build off this process and we can interact with Rob and Sean and we can get their feedback and we can acclimate what we're doing to the constituents throughout the state of Wyoming. So in addition to all the technical content, we've had these supply chain reviews throughout the state, and it really started with who could manufacture in Wyoming the components that we're looking for. What are the qualifications and credentials? What are the precision of each one of those processes? How does that translate into our reactor? But those turned into town hall meetings, people asking honest questions about nuclear and nuclear technology. So we became, over the course of several years now, we became very understanding of who's out there in Wyoming and what we can do for the future of nuclear. And then there was an ancillary benefit both for BWXT and the state of Wyoming, because once we had the ability to learn what exists here, we can start incorporating some of that manufacturing content into existing businesses that aren't microreactors.
Yeah.
So there's just been that dual benefit all along.
And then the other opportunity that, let's just explicitly talk about it, is workforce opportunity. And how might, let's say that BWXT did move forward with some kind of facility in the state, what kind of opportunities would that be for Wyoming workforce?
So it would be largely things that start with site prep and go through the build out of infrastructure, the construction of microgrids or small grids that are associated with microreactors, and then the operation of those microreactors. So it's that full cycle of opportunity, and a lot of the people working on those jobs can be part of that cycle. And the same thing goes with, we are looking at how to manufacture nuclear fuel in the state too. Same goes there. Those are good jobs. They're high-tech jobs. They're good manufacturing jobs. And those jobs will be long-term, because fuel facilities always have to have a long-term vision and order book. So it's akin to different energy industries that exist here in Wyoming. So the jobs are there. The jobs are there for a long cycle duration, and then they are constantly being upgraded over time as new technology evolves. We'll inject that into each one of those facilities, whether they be manufacturing or operational facilities for the reactors.
If you go back to what you said about leadership, in the leadership part of this recording, you were talking about building on your strengths. And I think that's exactly what you're saying here. So, I mean, Wyoming's been an energy leader in a lot of different areas. We've already talked about uranium, coal, oil, gas, and wind has been growing in the state. I mean, we just have so much going for us in terms of energy and high energy IQ and literacy. Now, yes, on uranium, we're building that energy IQ for commercial nuclear power. That's new for us as a state, but our social license surveys have demonstrated that people here are very open. And which might not always be what you read, but if you sit down with people one-on-one, they're very open, want to learn more, and generally supportive of everything.
Right.
Of all energy,
right, including
nuclear energy. So how do you see this nuclear manufacturing complementing the state's existing strengths?
I think it's generational. The conversation goes quickly in this state to, what does this mean for my kids and my grandkids? And it's a very generational thought process. And nuclear is very generational.
Yeah.
Right. They're long cycle businesses that have energy production in mind, have, the pragmatism that goes along with high consequence manufacturing. And that lines up really well with the core strengths inside of the state. So, there's two ways to think about this when you offer an opportunity. It's what's in it for me, or what's in it for the greater good. And it's definitely the latter in Wyoming, because it is generational, because everybody in this community depends on each other.
Right.
And when you depend on each other to prosper, you think in generational terms, and that lines up pretty well with how nuclear deployments exist.
It does. And if you even look at the existing fleet of light water reactors around the nation, were they built for 60-year operation? 40. And then they were allowed to operate for 60, and now they're maybe pushing to 80. These are your customers. Who doesn't want an 80-year customer for your fuel, right?
Exactly.
And that's the existing fleet, and this new technologies, hopefully they can have the same kind of commercial longevity. So
the commercial longevity, and there's just a very obvious business case for a fixed asset cost to be double, or 50 and 100% times operationally existing as compared to what it was originally designed for. So there's just a huge value proposition there that goes along with nuclear.
Great. So, Joe, what does the timeline look like for BWXT's evaluation and decision-making process in terms of moving forward in Wyoming?
So we have a couple different timelines that we're on. For our microreactor project for the Department of Defense, that's a fixed timeline, and we will execute on that. Specific to Wyoming, we have a couple of things that we're looking at. Is the integration of microreactors in the Trona patch. That's going to be highly dependent on what we believe the delivery timeline needs to be for the technology, but even more importantly to that is, what is the adoption timeline for Tata, right? Tata and other producers in that area. I mentioned Tata because we have a public letter of intent with them.
Right.
And so the build out of that facility is going to be based on their need. based on how we think the cost of the projects fit really well into their business case. And it's something that we work with them consistently on. And then fuel is a different timeline, right? So we're going through that evaluation period right now in manufacturing fuel. And so when we think about those timelines and the interactions that we're having within the state, what we want to do is continue to manufacture TRISO, which we're doing in Virginia, and then how do we on-ramp a greenfield facility is what we call it, a new build facility to manufacture TRISO fuel. So that timeline will evolve over the next several weeks and months, and then we'll start to talk more publicly about what that looks like. But it's going to follow, when we are in the state, it's going to follow the same timeline that we have been on our energy matching funds, in associating everything that we're doing, being very transparent with the stakeholders in the local area, having open meetings where they can come and ask questions. We'll bring our manufacturing experts, we'll bring our nuclear engineers, we'll bring all the product development folks that we have within our company and talk through each aspect of what we're planning on nuclear fuel manufacturing. We'll talk through, how this fuel will not only be produced, but also be put into the nuclear reactors, how it will be operated, and ultimately how it will be stored for the future.
Great. And I just want to thank you for, even as you're looking for ways to kind of find a home for manufacturing or work with the Trona Patch, you've been really engaged with us here at the School of Energy Resources here at the University of Wyoming. And I want to thank you for participating. So you helped make a commercial, and this is a shameless plug for our new Nuclear Energy Science Certificate. So students are in that certificate for the first time this fall 2025. And what we have found is the students are really interested in this topic. So to offer a course for the very first time, often there's not a ton of enrollment because the awareness is low and there's no record, and they're not telling their friends, hey, you should take this class. And we're offering 3 courses that are associated with that certificate this fall, and they all have great enrollment. And they're right now, for a lot of these students, because we just got the certificate stood up, they're actually an elective. So they're taking a really hard class as an elective, and the classes are full. So, or not full, but like very well populated.
I love to hear that.
Yeah.
And the certificate, what you'll start to see are other universities coming to Wyoming to ask how you did that, because we've already started promoting that to the other relationships we have, because it's the perfect blend of STEM students that are interested in nuclear. And there's a small fraction, maybe 20% of the engineering hires that we have in BWXT that are nuclear, but most of them are mechanical or industrial systems engineers, electrical engineers. So having that certificate is a big step up, and it's a big deal for us. So I think it's a great thing that the university has done. And the students that are engaged in that certificate program will definitely see opportunities. The nuclear industry is growing so fast. They're going to be hot commodities when they get out there into the job market. So I would definitely emphasize the importance of something like a nuclear certificate, and then the way that you guys are doing it is exactly right. Starting to pile on what they already are learning in their engineering degrees, and allow them the opportunity to understand more and be more applicable to the nuclear industry as they exit college.
Thank you. I did not make you say that. I just want everyone to know. But the other thing that we've done that is unique to what we do here at the School of Energy Resources is make it multidisciplinary. So there's a communications class in there. There's a law class. You don't have to take all of them to get the certificate, but we're going to make those options available. And that's something that no one else in the nation is doing.
I love it.
As far as we can tell. So great opportunity for UW students. I don't know how many listen to our podcast, hopefully some, but if their parents do, you should tell them to take the certificate if they're interested in nuclear energy. You heard it here from an industry executive. It's the right way to go. So Joe, thank you so much for all you're doing for the state. So for the last question, we are going to move away from energy and nuclear energy, but we always close our interviews with a question that focuses on this incredible state that we're so lucky to live in. And so can you talk about where you've been in Wyoming and anywhere that stood out as a favorite? It's going to be tough.
Not to pander to the University of Wyoming, but Laramie is my favorite spot.
Aww.
Yeah, my heart's here. My son goes to school here in the university, and it's unrelated to all the work that we're doing in Wyoming, but I'm glad he's here. It gives me even more reason to come back. So I've been to Cheyenne, Laramie, I've been to Sheridan, I've been to Lander, all beautiful areas.
Yeah.
I have a trip upcoming. I've been to Jackson. I have a trip upcoming to Gillette. So talking to some of our stakeholders there in Gillette, and I'll be speaking in Jackson in October. I think Wyoming's extremely unique. It's the people, it's the environment, it's the landscape. And so whenever I come here, I try to do something new every time, but I'm always in Laramie now, especially now that I have a freshman here at the university. So it's really the people, it's the focus, it's the thought process that goes around energy that keeps me coming back. And it really keeps BWXT here, and we're focused on being here for the long term.
Good. Well, we're focused on serving as a partner in any way we can here at the university. I know a lot of stakeholders, including the Wyoming Energy Authority, would say the same. So we're really grateful for the partnership and really excited about next steps. So thank you for all you do. And thank you, Joe, for doing the podcast.
Absolutely. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape, the podcast that highlights the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. You can expect a new episode of Energy Frontier every other Wednesday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. See you next time.